Welcome to It's All About the Questions, where learning to ask the right questions can help you achieve lifelong success. Now, here to help you ask all the right questions is award-winning author, international speaker, and business strategist, Laura Stewart.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone, and welcome to the show, a show that I haven't done in close to a month because I've had COVID and a secondary infection that almost went into pneumonia. But there is no way that I could cancel today's show that I am doing live right now, because the man that I am interviewing today is somebody so near and dear to my heart, somebody that every single thing he writes, I devour, and I forget to go to the bathroom until I have finished the book. And I forget to eat, which is a good thing. But I just have to devour everything word for word that he writes. So I'm so excited to have him back on the show today. His latest book, let's make this bigger here. And there it goes, is Cold Fear. Today we have John David Mann on the show, returning back to the show. He and Brandon Webb wrote this amazing book, the second book in a series, and a third book is forthcoming. Let me bring John on to the camera, my dear friend.
I am so sorry about the whole no going to the bathroom and no eating and no sleeping and no breathing, and you probably got all these infections because of me.
Well, it's so funny because there are very few books that I do that with, right? It's the books that are so incredible that you get sucked into the world so deeply. And, your comment, I know you're joking about not breathing, but it kind of happens. You almost can't breathe at moments in Cold Fear because it's like, but what's going to happen? What's going to happen? No, what? Oh, I can't believe it. Oh my God. Right. So yeah, that's basically what was going through my head the entire time. And I can't believe that didn't trigger a coughing fit, by the way.
Good for you.
It's your books. I mean, from The Go-Giver to all the Go-Giver books to all the books you've written with Brandon Webb, The Red Circle, Mastering Fear, all of the books about Brandon and Sniper School and all of that stuff just have always riveted me and kept me on the edge of the seat. And then to have fiction books from you, which prior to Steal Fear, the first book with Finn, the wonderful character, you'd never written fiction like this before. I mean, John, you're just amazing.
Well, it's certain. I'll say this: it sure is fun. It sure is fun to write. I've really, really been enjoying. I didn't know how much I wanted to write novels until I wrote my first one. My wife knew. Anna was saying for years, "You should write novels. You'd be great at writing novels. This would be really. You'd be a great fit for novelizing." And I was always like, yeah, I mean, I appreciate the vote of confidence, but I don't see it. But oh my God, Laura, when I got waist deep into the first book, Steal Fear. Steal Fear, by the way, just came out in paperback. Anybody who missed the first book, it's now out. You can stick it in your back pocket, convenient beach read format. Just find it at Walmart.
That book. Oh my God, that book. It was another one of those ones where I couldn't stop. Right.
You talk about being immersed in the environment or being immersed in the space of the book. And that's kind of evolved as part of the formula. I hate to use the word formula. It's part of the recipe for these books, for this Finn series. There's really, and there's really there's kind of like three dimensions to the book. And this took a while to discover in the process of writing Steal Fear. There's the plot. Right? There's what's going on. And it's a thriller. So that has to be propulsive and also puzzling, and a thriller has extremely demanding requirements for the writer, more so than any other book. Now, parables, and you know this about me, I love writing parables, and parables are really hard to write. It's an extremely demanding format also. Parables, very stripped down, very simple, fairly short. There's a dearth of detail, you don't learn much about the characters at all. Typically, there's not a lot of what you'd call character development in the normal sense, like in a great film or in a novel. And yet, you got to have a whole drama happen within a nutshell in a parable. So that's demanding. But man, I thought I knew demanding. I didn't know demanding until I wrote that first novel, Still Fear. Oh my Lord! So 400 pages or more, and you can't let the tension drop for a second. You can't let the mystery drop for a moment. You can't break the fourth wall, so to speak. You have to have that thing turning the page, and that's, as a writer, very demanding. For the first book, we talked about this. Maybe we talked about this. No, we missed it last year because we both went through surgeries last year. So, the first book, Still Fear, when I finished the first draft, I sent it to a writing consultant, story consultant, and paid for her to do a full summary, a full critique of the manuscript. It's before I gave it to our agent, before we even talked to publishers. And she took a few weeks and wrote back and said, there's really great stuff in here. And it's like half of it has to go. I mean, an awful lot of what's in here has to go away. She said, I think you have a fundamental misunderstanding of what a novel is. I was like, oh man, I don't want to hear this. So that was like my graduate school course on how to write a novel. What she was saying was, I had a lot of extraneous material that was fine as material goes, but it didn't fit. It was too much. It let the tension drop. It was saying something with 10 paragraphs that could be said with 2. It was saying something with 4 chapters that could be said with 1. And in the end, I took a 160,000 page manuscript and had to cut it down to 100,000. It was like, take out more than a third of the thing. But I think I've got it now.
That's interesting to me, John, because, I grew up reading Michener.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
not a thriller.
You could easily cut half of his books out based on what you just said, because they really don't add to the story.
Right.
But
you love it.
Everybody loved Michener and his books. And even Ayn Rand, right? You could cut so much out of her Fountainhead and all the other books that she's written because they're not needed.
J.R.R. Tolkien, right? You could cut out things.
No, you can't cut anything out of Tolkien. Sorry.
No, it's true. But the thing is that those aren't thrillers, right? I mean,
no, they're not. They're not thrillers. Now, I want to read the brief summary for anybody who has not read Still Fear or Cold Fear yet, which is out today. It is launch day, and I'm honored to always have you on launch day. So, disgraced Navy SEAL Finn is on the run, a wanted man since he jumped ship from the USS Abraham Lincoln. He's sought for questioning in connection to war crimes committed in Yemen by a rogue element in his SEAL team. But his memory of that night, as well as the true fate of his mentor and only friend, Lieutenant Kennedy, is a gaping hole. Finn learns that 3 members of his team have been quietly redeployed to Iceland, which is a puzzle in itself. The tiny island nation is famous for being one of the most peaceful, crime-free places on the planet. His mission is simple: track down the 3 corrupt SEALs and find out what really happened that night in Yemen. But 2 problems stand in his way. On his first night in town, a young woman mysteriously drowns, and a local detective suspects Finn's involvements. I've got goosebumps. And I've read the book multiple times. What's worse, a SEAL-turned-contract killer with skills equal to Finn's own has been hired to make sure he never gets the answers he's looking for. And he's followed Finn all the way to the icy north. Okay, if somebody doesn't want to get the book just from what I read, I've got goosebumps all over the place. And, you talk about this book editor, dramaturge, whatever you want to call her, who helped you with it. But I'm blown away, number one, by that, which I'm sure you wrote that part, right? I don't get how you, looking at all those different things, are able to make me feel like I have been somewhere I have never been before.
Yeah.
I've never been to Iceland. I don't know what is real of what you described in Iceland and what is not real, but I want to go to Iceland now.
Well,
Not
I'll
with
give
any
you
of the
I'll give
crazy
you a
stuff.
I'll give you a spoiler alert on that. It's pretty much all real. I mean,
Okay.
all the detail. So, there's sort of three dimensions in every book in the series, and one is, as I was saying, the plot. This is what happens. In the first book, Steel Fear, there was a serial killer on an aircraft carrier. That's a summary of the book right there. So Finn is stalking a serial killer on an aircraft. People are dying on an aircraft carrier. That's the plot. That's what happens. So there's sort of a procedural element to that. In Cold Fear, there's also a procedural element. There's this girl who mysteriously drowns. There's a detective who's trying to figure out why she drowned, who she is, what's going on there. Finn is also trying to figure this out, and he doesn't even know exactly why he's trying to figure this out. I know that sounds weird, but Finn isn't even entirely sure why he's in Iceland. There's an awful lot that Finn isn't sure about, and that's the second thread, the second dimension of these books. Is Finn's own internal quest. There's this external quest, but then there's this internal quest, which is Finn's got holes in his memory. He's got issues with his past. There's a sort of one reviewer this week just said that Finn is maybe best described as a combination of Jack Reacher and Jason Bourne. I love that description because the external, the plot, the procedural thing, that's very Jack Reacher. But the psychological thing going on for him is very Jason Bourne in the sense that there's stuff about himself he doesn't know. There's stuff about himself he isn't sure about. He's not entirely sure on the spectrum of good guy, bad guy, exactly where he falls. And we're not entirely sure either.
And there's a little bit of Harry Potter in there too. I don't know why.
If you like, that's okay with me. So there's that. And then there's the third dimension in these stories, which is the strange, foreign, weird environment. In Steel Fear, I'd never been on an aircraft carrier. Most people I know have never been on an aircraft carrier. It's a completely foreign environment. When you actually go in there, it's almost impossible to imagine. It's a steel tube the size of the Empire State Building, dropped in its side, put 6,000 people in it, plug it up, drop it in the water for 6 months. And it's like a small town on the water with all of the intrigue and the politics and everything. So it's an extraordinary environment. And part of the job of Steel Fear was, yes, solve the crime, do the whodunit thing, keep everybody guessing. So far, not a single person has written in and said they guessed the identity of the killer in Steel Fear, which I find really gratifying. Not one person has guessed.
I didn't guess in either book.
Yeah, well, I like that. Then there's the whole internal quest that Finn's going through, and you have to that has an arc to it. But then there's this weird environment, and one of the goals of Steel Fear was to make you feel at the end like you knew what life was like on an aircraft carrier. In Cold Fear, there's nothing really military about this book. It's takes place in Reykjavik, which is the northernmost capital city on the planet, the capital of Iceland, which is a strange place. It's a place that when I started writing Cold Fear, I didn't even really know exactly where it was on the map. So I had to learn everything about it from the ground up. And there is so much to know. They call it the land of fire and ice. It is situated on the top of the highest mountain peak of an undersea mountain range, longest mountain range on Earth. It's the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. And it's a volcanic mountain. So it literally sits on the tip of a volcanic fissure. My friend Brandon, my co-author, the Navy SEAL, had been to Iceland. He'd taken a couple days trip there during the Christmas break. And so he'd been there in winter where the story is set. And he went diving in a place at the head of Lake Thingvallavatn, which you visit at the end of Cold Fear.
That's the place where you can touch two continents, right? That's
the place where he said you could reach. He reached out his hands and he could touch with each hand the continental plate supporting Eurasia and the continental plate supporting North America. It's the only place on the planet Earth where you can touch two continents at once. And Finn describes it as a cut lunchbox sandwich split on the diagonal, pulling apart by an inch every year. And so this pulling apart every year on top of volcano means that Iceland is a land of volcanoes and earthquakes and glaciers, and it's just extraordinary. It has the highest literacy rate in the world, higher than US, higher than anywhere else in Europe. It had the first female head of state of any nation on Earth. It has the oldest functioning parliamentary democracy on Earth. It has the oldest written books that we know of from which Norse mythology and all of the rich vein of popular fiction and fantasy fiction these days based on Norse mythology, all that comes from Iceland. I mean, and there's Denmark and Norway and Greenland and blah, blah, blah. But Iceland is like this font of civilization in so many ways, and hardly anybody knows anything about it. It's so fascinating. So that was a big job.
All you really hear about Iceland is the Northern Lights and the hot springs, and it's really cold.
And which actually, it actually isn't as cold as everybody thinks. It is in the book because they're in a cold spell, and that does happen. But people know Bjork, and people know that there was a big volcano a couple of years ago that nobody can pronounce. And in the back of the book, I tell you how to pronounce it. So now you're all set.
So how did you gather all the information about Iceland? I know that you go on searches to find somebody, but I don't think a lot of my listeners really understand the work that goes into building a book like this, that the place is such a significant part of the plot to it. The place is a character. The
place is a character. There's a point in this story where Finn is he's following somebody, and he's also being followed. So he tries to lose himself in a crowd, and the crowd he loses himself in is this little tour group. So he sort of disguises himself as a tourist, and he's being wafted around the city in this tour group. And at one point, they walk by a hot dog stand. They all sample the hot dogs, and the tour guide tells them that it's Bill Clinton had a hot dog once there, and had it. I think this is still in the book. Bill Clinton had a hot dog there with and just stunned everybody by having only mustard on it. And ever since then, people like to eat hot dogs from that stand with only mustard. Well, that's a true detail. That actually happened. And the little weird little details like that are throughout the book. They're all factual.
So what is the normal
hot dog?
Put on the hot dog there? I mean, I'm a ketchup person, not a mustard.
I don't know. I forgot whatever the answer to that question is. It didn't matter, so I forgot it. Yeah, who knows? But the answer is it is a combination of just good old-fashioned research. I mean, ideally, I'd go to Iceland. But I didn't go to Iceland. It was the middle of COVID. Nobody was getting into Iceland. Nobody was traveling when I was writing this. So no, I didn't get to go to Iceland. I wrote most of Steel Fear before I ever set foot on the Abraham Lincoln, which I did eventually get to do. And that was really helpful. But I didn't get to go to Iceland in this one. Google, Wikipedia. I read there's a wonderful crime novelist called Arnaldur. They just use first names in Iceland. Arnaldur Indridason is we would call it a surname. It's not really, it's a patronym. But anyway, Arnaldur is the premier novelist in Iceland. And I dipped into one of his books just to get a flavor of Iceland. And after dipping into one of his books, I read everything he wrote. I couldn't stop. He's amazing. It was extraordinary. And from Arnaldur, I got the some facts, details, little things about Iceland, a small amount, maybe 5% of what I ended up getting, but also the flavor of it, and also the feeling of the culture and the spirit of the nation. I read other bits of fiction from Iceland. I watched a movie that was shot in Iceland, of which there are many, because they're just for the James Bond films with Iceland shots because they're so scenic. Right. But I found a movie that was shot all through Reykjavik and actually was in the city. But mostly I just delved and delved and delved and delved. I looked at lots of, I would ask Google a question. And how do they curse in Iceland? What do they have for breakfast in Iceland? What's the standard of living in Iceland? How many police are there on the police force in Iceland? I just, read and read and read and read and read. And then finally, I made friends with someone, a young woman who's an author herself, through a friend of a friend of a friend of Brandon's, who agreed to be my Iceland expert. And we corresponded like crazy, Silja. And I asked her dozens and dozens of questions that she took very patient time answering in detail. Right now I'm writing book 3, which takes place in another part of the world. And I've just found my correspondent for that part of the world. So I'm doing the same thing all over again. The big part of it is, honestly, Laura, and this fascinates me because I never knew this before. A big part of it is research, and the lion's share of research is asking the right questions. You can't just sit down and read an encyclopedia about Iceland and say, okay, you got to craft questions that turn up stuff that's interesting and colorful and relevant.
Right, because otherwise it's just facts.
It's just facts, which you cannot cram facts into a book because people will stop reading like that. It's not a thriller.
Right, exactly.
Not a thriller. That's the point. It's not a thriller.
Right.
That's okay. You don't read Hawaii by Michener to find out who the killer is.
No.
Right. So the other part of it is you just have to have a sort of empathy. I made a decision from day one that for me, Iceland would be a character. You said this, Laura, and you said it absolutely. You're absolutely right. The aircraft carrier was a character in the first book. It was kind of a monster, actually. It was a little bit like the shark in Jaws, but it was a complicated character with its own culture. Iceland is a character in this book, and like getting to know any character in fiction or in real life, in fiction that you're writing or in real life that you're living, you need empathy. You apply empathy. Just make a decision that you're going to imagine yourself into the shoes of that person. Imagine yourself into the soil of that nation, of that place. And what does it feel like? And that's really that's the writer's job.
And one of the other things you do so beautifully with Brandon is you create possibility as well and make us believe that things that you're talking about really can happen. Like going back to Steel Fear, right?
Yeah.
I remember I sent you an article a month or so ago that the USS Abraham Lincoln, an actual U.S. aircraft carrier that is a character.
There it is, right there. Yeah.
Just got its first female commander, Captain Amy Bauernschmidt.
Yeah. Yep.
First ever female to do this.
Yes.
To take over an aircraft carrier. So I'm so curious to see what other things in such positive ways of a world that you have built in this book, Cold Fear, and in your next book are actually going to come true because you thought it potentially into existence in a positive way.
It is strange. There's in Cold Fear. Yeah. In Steel Fear, Steel Fear in the first part of the book, there is a string of what appear to be suicides, which this is no spoiler alert because since I already said that there's a serial killer on boat, the perceptive listener will have already guessed that those aren't really suicides. But, a couple of months ago, there was a string of suicides aboard an American U.S. aircraft carrier. And it was like, ooh, it is sometimes the stuff you write. What we write, the events of these novels are fiction, but there are pieces of real life in them. And the things that aren't real life, the things that didn't really happen, they all could. And I'll give you an example. One of the continuing threads through the whole book is that in the weeks just before Steel Fear begins, there was a mission that went terribly wrong in Yemen with Finn's SEAL platoon. And that is one of kind of the signal events that started this whole saga going, where a whole bunch of civilians were slaughtered. by as it turns out, a sort of rogue band of SEALs.
Yeah, you can't tell anymore. Don't spoil.
I won't say anymore. But you know what? Those kind of wartime atrocities happen.
Yeah.
They've been much in the news in the last couple of years. So there are things that happen in Cold Fear that haven't really happened, but they could. They could happen. Everything has to be feasible, or the book doesn't work. The story doesn't work.
Right. That's how conspiracy series sort of get created, because there's some thread of possibility or truth in them. Now, Brandon Webb, your co-author here, your partner in crime, who literally partner in crime and thriller in this particular
partner in crime fiction.
Former Navy SEAL, SEAL sniper, added mindfulness to sniper training school. Amazing man, created amazing companies since his career as a Navy SEAL. I mean, he gives that military piece from having lived it, breathed it, and still working with people in those fields to help them and do different things with them. How do you guys work together to write stuff like this? Because number one, he's traveling all over the place still, right? And he's running his other business. You're writing, plus you and your glorious wife, Anna, wrote The Go-Giver Marriage that we talked about a whole bunch of months ago. Amazing book that I keep giving as gifts to people because it's such an amazing book, whether you are married, want to be married, or just want a better relationship with yourself. What's that relationship rate? We haven't talked a lot about that over the years. We've briefly touched on it, but it's different when you're writing a nonfiction book with Brandon, I would imagine, than writing a fiction book with Brandon.
Yes.
So
it is very different.
What that's like?
Yeah, that's a really perceptive point. It is radically different, a radically different relationship, because all the nonfictions, I think we wrote 5 or 6 nonfiction books together, and
I think there's like 7, but that's okay.
Okay, whatever. I lost count.
There's a lot, but not enough.
Books, by and large, in those books, I interview Brandon because the lion's share of the content comes from him, or in the case of some of the books, interviews with him and with other Spec Ops guys. Not all SEALs. Some SEALs, in for example, the Killing School. Killing School traces the story of 4 different snipers.
Amazing book.
But thank you. And one of them was Canadian infantry. One of them was Ranger, Army Ranger, U.S. One of them was, all different branches. One of them was a Marine sniper. So in those guys, I interviewed those guys. So I'm drawing real life material and turning it into a story, but it's nonfiction. It's real. This is different. I don't sit down with Brandon and do 12 hours or 25 hours or 50 hours of interviews about what happened, because nothing happened. I have to make it all up. So how we work together is very, very different. And you're right. He's traveling all over the place. We don't spend hours and hours and hours and hours on this. He does provide a military context. He has that bank of experience and knowledge, not just military, but also kind of intelligence and foreign affairs. He has sort of his finger on the pulse of the whole world of that whole world. But I don't get a lot of. It isn't like I go to him for a lot of facts. Mainly, I go to him for brainstorming. We brainstorm together. We'll get the basic idea of the plot, or some of the key plot threads. We'll brainstorm together. Or he'll have an idea of this, and I'll say, "Oh, it can be done that way," and he can say, "Oh, that." We go back and forth, and then I'll take what we got, and I'll start spinning characters, start spinning scenarios, start weaving connections between different events and how this might happen, that might happen. When I find myself in a corner, I wrote 2 emails to him this morning asking about specific events around a Coast Guard ship. When I get in a corner, either on some technical detail, or I've written myself into a corner that I can't figure out how to get out of, like how might this happen, or how might that happen? I'll just shoot it past him and say, "Got any thoughts?" And he'll go bing, 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 have this idea, that idea, and it'll spark me in a new direction. So he's it's kind of like having a mastermind group that you take problems to, but he's a mastermind group of 1. So he's kind of like my Icelandic consultant. And by the way, if I haven't said this already, and I haven't, writing a novel is a team effort. I don't care who says different. At least for me, for writing these books, I have a psychiatrist who's a dear, dear friend of mine. I'll be seeing in a few weeks in Houston when I go there for the book tour. I have a dear, dear friend who is a psychologist. I have a good friend who is a medical doctor, an Army medical doctor. I have all these experts that I go to. I just connected to somebody who's an expert in hurricanes, because there's a hurricane in book 3. Spoiler alert.
So there's a Coast Guard ship and a hurricane in book 3.
But I've already said too much. And so then I had this Icelandic expert. Well, Brandon is kind of like a member of that team for me, except that he has a much broader base of knowledge. He's kind of like my go-to guy on all subjects that have to do with the military, foreign affairs, or just story brainstorming.
There's so many different threads, I feel like, in a novel that you don't have to think about in nonfiction, and pieces in nonfiction that you don't have to think about in a novel. Like in nonfiction, you have to worry about, okay, is what I'm saying actual truth? Is it a perception of the truth? Are there other people involved in this that I need to get permissions or worry about what might happen? In a novel, even if you do a disclaimer in the front, it's all a work of fiction. There's still some of those concerns of, okay, I don't want somebody to perceive that maybe this is based on them, or a country to say I'm disparaging them, right? You want to be careful about certain things like that. Which do you find easier to write, or where do you have less worry when you're writing? Fiction, nonfiction, or it's equal?
I think they're both easy. And honestly, I don't worry about any of that very much. Okay. In fiction, I don't worry about whether people think whether my characters are too close to somebody real. The captain of the ship of the Lincoln in Steel Fear is a pretty crappy guy. He's a pretty serious jerk. And I met the actual captain of the Lincoln at the time when I was writing it, and in the credits in the back of the book, I say that he is, by the way, nothing like the captain in the book. I think that's the farthest I've gone to making it really clear that we're not writing about this guy. But I don't have too much worries about that. Country that I'm writing about right now, I'm being very careful to paint the people of that country in the best light, and not give in to the stereotypes that can often happen. And I think that's important, but that's the kind of care I take anyway, in any case, whether it's fiction or nonfiction or anything else. The only real times I've worried or been concerned have been issues of security and of military issues in some of the nonfiction, where we've actually had to have books cleared by the Department of Defense, and DoD clearance is just a major pain in the neck. We've had books where they've actually sent the manuscript back with a whole bunch of what do you call it when you do black marks of the whole thing? Oh,
redacted.
Yeah, thank you. Redacted, a whole bunch of stuff redacted. And the stuff they redacted was often really silly. It's like it's in the public domain. And there was stuff that we said in there that was a good deal more sensitive than that they didn't redact. So it has a pretty arbitrary feel to it. But I'm thrilled that we don't have to worry about that with fiction, which we don't. It's like, hey, it's fiction. Now, but I always take care to try to paint people in real or similar to real, to try to paint them in the best light, and even if they're creeps, to give you a sense of their humanity.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I've noticed in both of these books. You mentioned Jack Reacher, Jason Bourne. Let's talk about those authors that wrote those books. They're famous for creating characters that you care about. I remember when I got divorced for the second time, and a friend said I needed to read the Jack Reacher books. And I said, why? I'd never read anything by the author before. And she said, because the bad guy always gets it really, really bad. And you care so much about the Jack Reacher character. You can see the coiled violence in them, but controlled with the intelligence. And I started reading them and I totally got it. And then literally went to the library, took the shelf off the library and just read.
Yeah, dragged it home. Yeah, dragged the whole shelf home. Yeah.
Yeah, with you, you know. And I remember when I was asked to interview another author who I thought was Brad Thor, but it wasn't. It was a different Brad. But in my head, it was Brad Thor. And I was so excited because I love everything Brad Thor has ever written, right? And then the weekend before the interview, this is back when I was in broadcast, I went, oh my God, it's not Brad Thor. I've never read anything this guy has written, but they sent me his new book. So I went to the library, realized he had 2 shelves full of books.
Brad Meltzer?
No, it wasn't even Brad Meltzer.
Some other Brad.
It was another Brad. So
My goodness.
I ended up spending the 4 days reading every single thing. Thank God I read really, really fast, back to back, every single book he'd written. And I fell in love with his characters. That's the same thing I get with Finn and the characters you talk about in Steel Fear and in Cold Fear. And I'm looking forward to the 3rd book, which has no name as of this point, it's not like Voldemort, he who will not be named, but we're not talking about the name of the book at this point. The depth of the character, the human character versus the ancillary characters like the setting, the locations, because those are so critical. I'd love to know, because like I know Brandon, have not actually physically met Brandon, but many, many conversations with Brandon, and I've had him on my show. I compared him to Harry Potter, one of the first interviews I ever did with him, because he said his mom didn't want him doing it. She wished he was more like Harry Potter. And I felt like he was, because snipers are like Harry Potter, where you have to, it's not about killing somebody. Like James Bond, it's not about that final thing. It's about the intelligence gathering and all this stuff that has to happen because you never want to pull the trigger, right?
Yeah.
How did the Finn character really come about? And is he an amalgamation of Brandon and a lot of other characters? Or is Finn somebody you guys just completely made up? I've never asked you that. And
so
curious.
That's a great question. That's a great question. And it really was a fun process. I can tell you exactly how it happened. So Brandon had the idea for Steel Fear, as you know. He had the basic plot idea like 25 years ago, back when he was in the service in the early 90s, before he was even a SEAL, in fact. He was a rescue swimmer and sonar operator on a helicopter team. So he had this idea based on some events that happened on that aircraft carrier. And he'd done a little bit of writing. He'd written up some chapters. He had some drafts. He had like 12,000 words of a story idea that he'd done over the years. And he asked me about if I would be interested in working with him on this novel back in 2009. 10 years later, we finally got down to it. And I read what he'd written. What the story didn't have was a hero. It had a hero, but I didn't think it was a hero that could really carry the novel. It was actually Scott who stays in the novel as a Mustang officer with one leg. You encounter him in the book, but he was the original hero. Said no. We need somebody more complicated, somebody darker, somebody with a more puzzling past. And so I spent like a year and a half dreaming about who would that be. And that was actually before we did any work on the novel, before we were even working at all on the novel. I was working on Finn. The original idea for him came from based on another character, a real person who'd had a traumatic event happen in his childhood, which is similar to what happened to Finn in his childhood. Not exactly identical, but similar. So there was that spark from real life. And then I have stuck on like pieces of clay stuck on a clay figurine, aspects of Brandon's life. I borrowed from Brandon's life Brandon grew up in his teens in the docks of Southern California, worked in a dive boat. Well, so did Finn. Brandon was a rescue swimmer on an aircraft carrier before he was a SEAL. Well, so was Finn. Brandon had a really, really close friend, his best friend, Glenn Doherty, who was killed in Benghazi in that infamous event in 2012, I guess it was, I think. And Finn had his friend, Lieutenant Kennedy, and Kennedy's based on Glenn. So there are pieces of Finn's biography, Brandon's biography, which I know really well, almost as if it were my own, because of all the years of talking with him, talking through all these events that have happened to him. A lot of things that happened to Brandon. Well, yeah, we won't get into it, but there's a lot of things that I know that aren't even in the books we've written.
Right.
So that is a huge resource for me that I've drawn on to help round out Finn's character. But the core of Finn's character isn't anything like Brandon. The core of his character is this incredibly damaged boy who suffered terrible trauma as a child in an event that we learn about. And there's also more trauma that we haven't yet learned about, sort of trauma of neglect and trauma of other kinds of things that happened to him growing up that we'll learn as the books unfold. And he's struggling to find his own humanity, to really find his own, you can make it simple and say his own goodness. He's struggling to find his own humanity. He presents in book 1 in Steel Fear as somebody who doesn't seem to even have any feelings. Empathy, he says, it seems to be a muscle he was born without, or maybe it was severed at some point in childhood. You see a gradual change in Steel Fear, I once wrote, was all about leadership. Right. Cold Fear is kind of a parable about friendship. And you see him starting to recover pieces of himself, not only pieces of his memories, but also pieces of his humanity. And that's, somebody asked me a question a couple of weeks ago in an interview. They said, are the events of Steel Fear based on real life, or is this pure entertainment? He said, or is it pure escapism? And I was like, wait, those are my only two choices? I have never bought this idea that fiction is escape. There's fun escape. I'll watch, Princess Bride is just
classic.
But you know what? Even that isn't pure escape. Even though it's most comedies are just hilarious, wonderful escape. But even so, there's a heart at the core of Princess Bride, which is all about true love, right? Love, true love. So the same for me is true about great fiction. Great fiction is not a way is not a way to escape reality. Great fiction is a path that helps you engage in reality. That's what I think. So I think when you read about Jason Bourne struggling to figure out where he's come from, what has he done? Is he an assassin? Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? What the hell is going on here? When you read Jack Reacher sticking up for the underdog and overcoming ridiculously outlandish odds, there's a piece of Jack Reacher that you take with you into your life. This is why your friend told you to read the Reacher books. And I think that's just brilliant. You take a piece of Harry Potter with you. You take a piece of, anybody that you have the experience. There are characters in Cold Fear who, other than Finn, there are other characters that I guarantee when you finish the book, you will take away. The lead detective.
Oh my God, I loved her character.
Krista Kristjansdottir.
Yeah, I wasn't going to try that.
The reviewers have actually, every reviewer has singled her out as saying this is a character who could hold her own series. I fell in love with this. She's great. This like 50-something-year-old, kind of bitter. We assume she's single. We don't know much about her past, although we learn a little bit about the tragedy of her childhood. And she has the foulest mouth in the book. And, everybody who reads her loves her. You'll take a little bit of her passion, her incapacity to and refusal to understand random violence, wanton violence. there is something compassionate about her that just sticks with you. And that's, to me, that's one of the goals of great fiction, is to give you pieces of humanity that you take away with and make it part of your own and help you adapt to and cope with your own life and solve your own life problems more readily.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that, John. You know, when I read your books, when I read other fiction books of the genre, and even when I read your nonfiction work with Brandon and not with Brandon, because I've read everything you have ever written, singularly or with other people, including your MLM book, I find that I learn about myself when I'm reading them. Any book I read, there's always something about myself I learn, either in how I'm reacting to whatever's unfolding on the pages, or how I'm not reacting to something, dissociating because it might be too difficult. I don't like reading about serial killers, but yet in your books, it's okay, because it's not like reading about, it's not like The Silence of the Lambs,
Right.
which I just couldn't tolerate. It's about this person who's doing these things, but it's about humanity. It's about all the other people around it and what an individual could do to make a difference.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a true gift, John. And I know this is only your second fiction book, but to me, you have a gift for helping us explore the world and ourselves through the characters that you write. And that is such a beautiful thing to me.
That's so sweet. I so appreciate that. And I so appreciate that, especially because that's what I want to do. For years, I would think, when Brandon had first posed this question in 2009, you want to write this novel with me? I thought about it for years, honestly. It's like, why would I want to? I have a belief, which is that you get more of what you focus on. What you put your attention on shows up more in your life. So if you are focusing on things that could go wrong, more things go wrong. If you focus on things that could go right, more things go right. It's an oversimplification, but that's the basic idea of it. Brandon taught that in his sniper course. If you focus on don't miss, you'll miss. If you focus on here's what I need to do to make it right, even for snipers, positive thinking. But for years, I would sort of debate with myself, why would I want to spend a year of my life getting inside the mind of a devious monster who does terrible things to innocent people? It's like, what's the point there? And I wrote about this in Crime Reads, and I wrote an essay there whose title is "What's a Nice Guy Like Me Doing in a Homicidal Place Like This?" And for me, the idea of it is exactly what you said. It's terrible things do happen. And that is just really a part of life. Now, most of us won't experience the kinds of terrible things that happen in these novels,
right?
The serial killers and the wanton murders and so on. But we do experience terrible things, whether they're illnesses or personal betrayals or bankruptcies or, financial reversals or divorces or, we experience terrible things. And yet we go on. How do we do that? And that's really the study of the book. Anyway, so I appreciate the comment, and that's what we are pulling for Finn. Finn has not totally pulled himself out of the extremely difficult puzzle of his life by the end of Cold Fear, but he's gotten a good chunk closer.
And I can't wait to see what happens in book 3. And we're getting close to the end of the time, but this idea just popped into my head, and I do not know if you and Anna would have even thought about doing this, right? Because you wrote The Go-Giver Marriage and you're so good with the fiction. Okay. Have you guys ever thought about writing not a romance novel, but you know how Barbara Taylor Bradford wrote A Woman of Substance and books like that? I could see you and Anna writing some amazing book about women and about, romance and about love and about life in a fiction book versus the parable of the Go-Giver Marriage. I could totally see you guys doing something amazing in that genre.
That's really
You might not
interesting
be
that you
thinking
say.
about it. I'm just throwing it out there.
Well, that's great that you would say that. I will say two things to that. One is I personally love writing strong female characters. In Cold Fear, there's one, and really there's basically one strong female character in Steel Fear, Monica. We have not seen the last of her, by the way.
Oh,
And Cold Fear, there are not one, not two, but three really strong female characters. And one of them dies on page 5. And yet still, somehow, by the end, she emerges as a hero.
Yes.
All three of them
We're not teasing.
powerful.
Well, we just teased.
No, I teased, but that's okay. Just a tease, not a reveal. So all three are really strong characters. I'll also add this. Anna and I we do have a book idea, and it'll happen one of these years.
Okay, cool. Now, tell everybody how they can get the book that released today. And you have a book tour, which I'm really excited you're going on. Unfortunately, I can't make any of them, but I wish I could.
First book tour.
I would love to.
We couldn't do it last year. There was too much going on with COVID. Too many stores were still closed. But we're doing it this year. I'm thrilled. So,
and it's not just virtual. This is live in person,
in bookstores, signing people's books with a real pen in our real hand. There's the website there. It's webandman.com. And on that site, you can buy the book you can buy signed copies of the book, no matter where you are in the country. You can buy copies signed by both Brendan and me. You can also find our book tour. And the first event of the book tour is tonight in Portland, Oregon. Second event is tomorrow in Manhattan. Third event is the next day in Coral Gables. I mean, we're going all over the country. I'm going to be in Texas, in Houston, in Dallas, in Waco. Going to be in Rhode Island. We're going to be just south of Hartford, Connecticut. So yeah, we're going all over the country with a live book tour, which we're really excited to be able to do, to see readers and fans face to face and answer their questions and chat it up and sign books. So.
And there's one virtual one, I think, that Brad Thor is interviewing. The two of you.
We're doing two virtual events. One with Brad Thor. Yeah, that is pretty exciting. So Brad and Brandon and myself in conversation through SoftRep, which is Brandon's media company. I don't recall the date of that, but it's on the site. And then we're also doing another virtual event through Warwick's in Southern California with Robert Crace.
Wow, that's awesome.
Author of the Elvis Cole Joe Pike novels, which has an enormous fan following. This guy, Robert Crace, he wrote for Hill Street Blues, man. He wrote for Miami Vice. I mean, he's crime writing royalty. Yeah, he's a very, very, both of these guys are just tremendously nice gentlemen. So we're doing virtual events with those two guys.
Yeah, Brad Thor was the guy I thought I was interviewing, but it was Brad Taylor I was interviewing, who I love and have interviewed multiple times.
All right.
Yeah, I'm excited to watch the interview with Brad Thor with you guys. And I hope everybody buys the book, John. I mean, hold up your physical copy because I only have the cover on my Kindle copy.
They did a beautiful job with this book.
They really did. Last thoughts that you want to share?
There he is. Even the spine is lovely.
I know. And you can't feel it on the Kindle in terms of how the book feels, but I'm such a tactile person. I actually had the early release you sent me so I could prep for the interview. You had sent me a PDF. I literally printed it out, all 400 plus pages. I killed a tree printing it, but I needed to feel like I was turning the pages of the book, And there's something so special. So I encourage everybody to get the physical copy of the book or the Kindle copy if you prefer Kindle. And there's an audiobook version as well.
The audio is stunning too. The reader is amazing. He's a really accomplished actor.
Yeah. And that's how you'll know how to properly pronounce all the names in the book.
That's right. Although I do give you a pronunciation guide back.
You do. And it was really, really helpful. It was very, very helpful. And I always love reading your acknowledgments.
I read the first 31 chapters of the book out loud on my Instagram account. You can go to my Instagram if you want. I'm just at John David Mann. And you'll find the first 31 chapters of the book. You'll even get to hear me struggle through some of the Icelandic words, as well as some German words and a bunch of other things. So.
Oh, I'm going to have to go up to your Instagram now and check that out. Last thought that you want to leave my listeners about writing, about this book, about the partnership, or really about anything, because I just love listening to you.
I'll say two things, that just the first two things that come to mind. And the first thing is that I really hope you enjoyed the book. I hope you enjoyed the stories. That the story of Finn, it's like in a good TV series. In every season, there's a story that kind of resolves itself, right? The season's arc, but there's also a larger arc that doesn't resolve till the end of the entire series. And that's the case here. Every book has its own mystery that gets solved. At the end of the book, you know what happened. But there are larger issues that don't get resolved at the end of the book. We get closer, but there's still so much missing. I don't know whether that's going to be 5 books, 6 books, 7 books, 10. I don't know how many books it's going to be. And I don't yet know all the pieces myself, although I do know some of them. But I can promise you that if you join us in this journey and stick with Finn is going to somehow come out of all this. As we all are, we're going to come out of this. We're going to come out of this okay. That's my intention. We'll see how it goes. And so I really appreciate every single person who reads these books, because without readers, there's no books.
That is so true. And your books, everything, nonfiction and these 2 fiction books, are totally worth reading. So thank you for being with me, John, and for always doing launch day with me, because I know this is going to be another best-selling book. And I really hope this hits New York Times. I know you're already a New York Times best-selling author, but these books deserve to be New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today best-selling books. They're that good. I devoured them. I forgot to go to the bathroom. I forgot to drink. I almost forgot to breathe. I was just like, but I need to know what happens.
These books are a health threat. Yes.
Yes. In a good way.
In a good way.
Yeah. So thank you for being here with me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. I love the tradition we have going here every year, launch day with Laura. So
I love it. Sometimes twice a year, because you have other
books
out. It's really
We'll
great.
do it again. I have 2 coming next year, so we'll do it twice next year.
Oh, I can't wait. I love it. It's so great. And hold up Cold Fear one more time for those who are watching on video, so they can see the actual cover.
Cold Fear, just so you know, paperback Steel Fear.
Yes. Awesome. And it is a great beach read, really. Airplane read, beach read, boat read, whatever.
It's
get
in
the
airport
book.
bookstores. I'm so happy to see that.
Oh, that's so nice. I always get books at airport bookstores.
Yeah.
It's really great. Well, thank you again for being here with me.
Thank you.
And everybody, grab your copy of Cold Fear by Brendan Webb and John David Mann. I hope you enjoyed getting to talk to John today, to hear what he had to say about his writing process, about the partnership, about the characters and how he builds them. And I hope we've teased you to get a copy of this book. If you already have a copy, remember to rate it, review it up on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you got the books. Post on social media. These books are great, and your support always helps the authors that I have on the show. Comment on social media. John mentioned he's read part of the book up on his Instagram at John David Mann. If you're watching this on video, the website is listed on the video. If you are on podcast, top 3% globally for this show. So thank you for that year after year. Webandmann.com. That's WEBBANDWAMANN.com. Webandmann.com with 2 N's to get a copy of their book. I want to thank you all for being with me here. And I apologize that I have been off the mic for the last 4 weeks due to illness, and I'm hoping that I am back now. And I love all of your support and the notes you all sent to me saying, hey, are you okay? I'm okay. I'm coming back. Love you guys for listening. Love you all for commenting. Please go buy a copy of John's latest book, Cold Fear. It will keep you on the edge of your seats. Have a great day, everyone. And remember, the right questions can change your life.
You've been listening to It's All About the Questions, starring Laura Stewart. Connect with Laura at it'sallaboutthequestions.com and download a free workbook that will help you ask better questions starting today.